EJ Antoni is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. EJ, always great to have you on. Big news, of course, over the weekend. Not really a surprise, but President-elect Donald Trump talking about a 25% tariff against Mexico and Canada. Goods coming in from Mexico and Canada will be imposing a 25% tariff. This, of course, tied to illegal immigration. And we all know that illegal aliens are coming across the southern border, northern border as well. So let's talk a little bit about this, because, I mean, personally, for me, tariffs, I mean, this seems like a good idea. You've got other people, though, that just absolutely freak out over tariffs, because what they're saying is that this will be like a tax on the American people. So I call you, EJ Antoni, financial analyst with the Heritage Foundation. You've also seen EJ on Fox News Business. EJ, what do you think? Is this going to lead to higher prices?
Well, Dan, one of the things I don't understand is why people, especially economists, make this big distinction between tariffs and between other types of taxes. Why, for example, are we only free trade when it comes to international trade? Why are we not free trade when it comes to domestic trade? And so that's why I really like this idea of pairing these tariffs with reductions in domestic taxes. In other words, we're going to reduce things like the federal income tax in exchange for these tariffs. So at the end of the day, I don't see why you would see any change in terms of what Americans are actually having to pay. So what I mean by that is, okay, you're going to pay a little bit more for something that you buy overseas, except you have more money with which to pay for it.
So it'll all balance out, is what you're saying.
Right, exactly. Again, we make this false distinction between different types of taxes, but if you're just going to raise an extra dollar over here and raise an extra dollar less over there, at the end of the day, it's a wash.
Have we ever seen, EJ Antoni, have we ever seen a sort of a tit for tat, if you will? So in this instance, you've got President-elect Trump saying, yo, Mexico, we got all these illegal aliens coming across our southern border. If you don't close the border, if you don't help us stem the tide, we are going to impose a 25% tariff against your goods coming into America. Is that common? Maybe it is, and I just don't know.
No, it's really not common, and this is where you have to give President Trump credit. Love him or hate him, he has figured out how to essentially weaponize the purchasing power of the American consumer. And so if you can threaten but not actually have to go through with these tax increases, that's even better. Now, remember before we were just saying, like, all right, you can raise a dollar over here and have a dollar less over there. What's great about these tariffs is the fact that the tax incidence, in other words, who actually pays the tariffs, is not exclusive to just the American people. What we saw during the first Trump administration, for example, was about 81 cents out of every dollar in tariffs that was put in place was not paid for by Americans in the form of higher prices. It was paid for by Chinese producers in the form of lower profits. And so they basically had to just eat the cost of the tariff. They couldn't pass it all on to the American people. That's basically what we're seeing right now. Trading partners like Mexico and Canada, the vast majority of their exports come here to the United States. Only only a few percent, at single digits of our exports, go to places like Mexico or Canada. And so if you want to get into some kind of tariff battle with those countries, they're going to lose. We would literally put them into recession if we got into a trade war with those countries. And meanwhile, America would do just fine.
Well, listen, EJ, you've been watching Donald Trump for a long time, and in your role as an economist. And so part of my question would be, all right, so we know that Trump, it is the art of the deal. And so he knows that we want less illegal immigration. And so to Trump, I mean, this is what he does. This is part of the whole discussion of negotiation.
Oh, absolutely. And, sure enough, literally within hours of him making this announcement that we're going to slap these massive tariffs on Canada and Mexico, within hours, Justin Trudeau is on the phone begging him not to. And not even a day later, he's down in Mar-a-Lago kissing the ring. Yeah. So they're already starting to capitulate. And, sure enough, Mexico took a very belligerent tone at first. but then in subsequent phone calls, all of a sudden, they're beginning to bend the knee too. Again, because they all realize what we just said, the fact that we have all the leverage when it comes to international trade with Mexico and Canada. We hold all the cards.
You talked about, Mexico is our largest trading partner, and one of the concerns you talked about a trade war between Mexico, Canada, and the United States, where, okay, so we're going to throw a 25% tariff against Mexico and Canada. They could, in turn, put tariffs on our goods leaving America, our exports, and heading into Mexico and Canada. So, but you say that really wouldn't have a massive impact on our economy?
Right. Again, that has to do with just the limited amount of sales, if you want to call it that we send to Mexico, that we send to Canada. Look at it this way. Imagine if one person decided, I'm going to boycott Walmart. I'm not going to buy from them anymore. Would Walmart even notice? Now, that's an extreme example, right? It'd be a little worse for America, to lose a lot of its exports to Mexico or to Canada, but it would not be devastating. It would not have anywhere near the impact if you reverse it. In other words, if Mexico all of a sudden exported a heck of a lot less to the U.S. It's the difference between a blip on the radar or a recession.
Well, Trump, I mean, you and I both know, because we've talked about it many times, EJ Antoni, is that Trump loves his tariffs, and he's always loved his tariffs, and he's talking about a 10% tariff to Chinese products as well. And so when you start talking about the Chinese products and the 10% tariff on those, is China in a better position to negotiate than, say, for example, Mexico and Canada?
I don't think they are, and for a couple of reasons. And it's not just a matter of who buys more, from the other person, but there's a lot of other politics at work here. There's different international factors, geopolitical factors. I really don't think China is actually in that great of a position. Their biggest asset that they have is a billion people. Yeah. But outside of that, I mean, they really don't have too many advantages over the United States, and so they don't actually have that much leverage either. We forget that almost all of the economic data coming out of China is just absolute junk. You can't trust any of it. A great example of that is when they talk about how much they're exporting, except if you look at all of the nations to which they export that actually have reliable economic data, you can add up everything they're buying from China and you realize, wait a second, these figures don't match, not by a long shot. In other words, I think China is in a much weaker position economically than we give them credit for. Yet again, another example of how America really holds the cards in this negotiating relationship.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that Xi Jinping sends out, a lot of that is sort of propaganda, if you will, because he doesn't want to lose face with the Chinese people. So, EJ, what is Trump and the Chinese, and when they talk about a 10% tariff for Chinese products coming into America, what does Trump want from China?
Well, one of the things that he wants them to do is to stop manipulating markets. They need to stop subsidizing their own industries, where the government essentially gives all of this money to manufacturers so that they can produce things insanely cheap, cheaper than anybody else, and then they dump that product onto markets like the United States, and all of a sudden all of our manufacturers start going out of business. They're also engaging, this has been going on for decades, they're also engaging in a lot of currency manipulation where they purposely devalue their own currency, the renminbi. And the reason for that is because then it makes it a lot cheaper for Americans to buy Chinese goods. Now, it causes all other kinds of problems, but in the short term, at least, it helps their manufacturing base and hurts ours. And so Trump essentially wants to make sure they put an end to all of those types of practices that are essentially hollowing out America's industrial base to the benefit of the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, don't forget, I mean, stealing our intellectual property. I mean, EJ, you and I could go on and on about China. When it comes to Trump and tax policy, when he comes into office, takes that oath of office on January 20th, we know that the president in the past, in his first term, he really simplified a tax policy. And so I guess part of what I'm curious about is, what do you see him with now that we know the new makeup of Congress? We have the majority in the Senate and the House, and we will have the White House as well. So given what we know about the majorities in the House and the Senate, have the White House, what do you see President Trump being able to accomplish as far as tax policy goes?
Great question. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a whole lot of appetite in Congress for real tax reform. So I think the best we can do is just basically extend the current tax cuts that were put in place at the end of 2017. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I just wish it, could be even better. I wish we could get the tax rates even lower for people, because not only would that mean people paying a lower tax rate, but it would also help spur even more economic activity. Unfortunately, though, it looks like the margins are just going to be too thin in Congress, and we're just going to have too many rhinos in place who aren't really going to be willing to go along with the program. Now, that being said, there's a tremendous amount that the president can do just on his own. There's a tremendous amount that the incoming Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, can do working with the president. And so I'm still very, very hopeful that they'll be able to get a lot done. I just don't think we're going to be able to simplify the tax code quite as much as we saw the first go around. But hey, maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised.
Rewind a little bit, EJ, very quickly. So Trump, the 25% tariff against Mexico, tying it to illegal immigration. Has the president-elect actually given any benchmarks that Mexico needs to hit in order for him to lower that tariff threat?
I wouldn't say anything solid in terms of this is the percentage decrease in fentanyl we want crossing our borders. Now, maybe that's because the president, for him, the only acceptable threshold there is 0. I'm not quite sure. But that could also be part of the whole negotiating tactic. I'm going to come in here with these wild demands and then meet you somewhere in the middle, which is probably where I wanted to meet you to begin with. But again, I have to approach it from one extreme in order to kind of move that Overton window.
Yeah, listen, EJ, you and I both know that is what Donald Trump does. And as always, appreciate you joining us here on Nashville's Morning News. EJ Antoni talking about over the weekend, big news, of course, before the pardoning of Hunter Biden and some of the other things that have taken place now here in the last day or so. But very big news with President Trump threatening a 25% tariff against not only Mexico, but Canada as well, and that 10% tariff against Chinese products as well. So very big news. Part of what I have come to expect, and you folks know me, I've been on WTN for a long time. Part of what I naturally expect is the media to always, no matter what Donald Trump does, it's always going to be hair on fire, right? Always going to be hair on fire. But that's why I have people like EJ Antoni on to sort of go through this in a very methodical kind of way and talk about it and just, let people know that what you're seeing on CNN and MSNBC and a lot of the mainstream media, there's always going to be two different ways to look at a story. There's the hair on fire, like most of the media. Anytime Donald Trump does anything, they hate it. And they'll call Donald Trump all kinds of names. But then the reality is that once Trump actually does what he says he's going to do, there's oftentimes people take a step back and they say, well, you know what? That wasn't nearly as bad as we thought that it would be.